Welcome to The Oldest Republic, a podcast entirely dedicated to the century-old history of San Marino, the republic that boasts a fascinating and layered history, so long that it has earned the nickname of the oldest in the world. My name is Carlotta, and in this first episode we will investigate the medieval roots of San Marino, how the community on Mount Titano was formed, how it managed to turn itself into a small state, and why its identity continues to seduce historians, tourists, and history lovers alike. From the early Middle Ages until the establishment of the first municipal nucleus, San Marino was shaped at the intersection of religion, political organization, and the collective imagination. Behind every stone of the fortresses, every civic rite, every story about the founder saint hides a complex interaction between the desire for autonomy and the building of a common memory. Today, we will start from here, from the medieval period, to understand how the myth was born, how the community grew, and how the idea of freedom that has always distinguished the longest-lived republic has been rooted. Be prepared, because reality often goes beyond the legend, or rather, it makes it even more interesting. Today, we will tell you all about it, right after our intro. Welcome to the Oldest Republic. I'm Carlotta. Come join me in this amazing adventure. Enjoy the episode. Each community has its own founding stories, and San Marino is no exception. You may have heard that the Republic was born in 301 AD, founded by the Dalmatian stonecutter Marino. And in the official San Marino documents, the counting of the years begins in 301. It is a conscious choice, which claims the great antiquity of this small state. But how do such narratives come about? And above all, why do they resist in time? To answer this question, we must remember that almost always there is a gap between the actual events and their tales, which are charged with symbolic value. This doesn't mean that tales are any less important. Every society builds myths and legends that serve to cement identity and to offer examples of heroism or just to figuratively explain the birth of a political system. In Roman tradition, Rome was said to be founded in 753 BC by Romulus. This is also a very strong and evocative tale, but not necessarily fully true. Similarly, the dating from 301 expresses the idea of continuity throughout the centuries that all San Marino people cherish. They do so not because there is a contemporary document that proves the foundation of San Marino by Marino in that specific year, but because it is a fundamental identity reference. So, when we talk about the origins of San Marino, we must keep together the historical and archaeological information. And the latter we will deal with in an episode of the Ad Hoc podcast, with hagiographic and political narratives, with the intervention of the founder saint, and the miraculous granting of an entire mountain. To understand this story, let us imagine San Marino in the 6th or 7th century. It was a strategic relief in a territory crossed by military and religious powers, in a border area between the Byzantines and the Lombards. In this scenario, the story of Marino, a semi-legendary figure, gains strength, attributing to him the charisma of a founder and the legitimate possession of the mountain. The date of 301 is conventional, but it does not mean that San Marino was empty in the first centuries of the Middle Ages. On the contrary, several sources attest settlements along slopes and valleys. In the 6th century, Italy was shaken by the Gothic War. The Byzantine recaptured the peninsula from the Ostrogoths, but soon after, the Lombards took it largely and settled in the Po Valley. San Marino, being located halfway between the Adriatic coast and the Apennines, is a tactical fortress, so it is plausible that in the Gothic era there was at least one garrison on the top. A key element supporting this hypothesis is the treasure of Domagnano, discovered in the late 19th century. We're talking about jewels of the highest quality, perhaps belonging to a woman of high rank, a sign that the Germanic elites frequented this area. It is a clue that tells us the strategic importance of the hills of Rimini. In addition, a 6th century source, the Life of Saint Severinus, mentions Mount Titas or Titano as the seat of a monastery. There is talk of a monk named Basso, and this suggests that the San Marino community had an already very ancient religious vocation, linked to the expansion of monasticism in those lands. The actual name San Marino appears in documents dated between 754 and 756, when Pippin the Short, who was king of the Franks, promised the Pope to recapture some places that had been in the hands of the Lombards. Among the centers listed, there is a Castellum Sancti Marini, a clear sign of the existence of a fortified settlement, recognized as relevant. It is a crucial reference to understand that even then there was talk of an inhabited nucleus, partly military, partly religious, because of course it was associated with a saint. In the 10th and 11th century, the identity of this community is consolidated. Around a parish church and a hagiographic narrative, a people gradually recognizes themselves in a saint and in a territory. Since 951, when the word plebs Santi Marini appears, we know that the people of that mountain meet in a mother church, the Pieve of San Marino, feeling part of the same whole. The word Pieve corresponds to people, so the Pieve is the place where children were baptized and the main religious services were celebrated. It also becomes a center for community gathering. In this framework, the life of San Marino emerges, a hagiographic work of uncertain dating. However, it can be placed around the 10th century. It tells the story of a stonecutter from Dalmatia and a companion, Leo. Both would have been consecrated clerics by the Bishop of Rimini, Gaudentius. Marino, who took refuge on Mount Titano, would receive it as a gift after a miracle, becoming its rightful owner. In the Middle Ages, owning a territory as a saint meant placing it in a sacred sphere and in some way autonomous, so much so that the state of the church was called the patrimony of St. Peter, and for example the properties of Monte Cassino were also called the lands of St. Benedict. The same idea applies to San Marino. A saint who obtained the mountain justifies an original freedom. This appears in contrast to the claims of the Bishop of Montefeltro, who considered himself the rightful owner of all churches in his diocese. By supporting the intervention of the Bishop of Rimini and the miraculous gift to Marino, the life of San Marino suggests a dependence on Rimini instead of Montefeltro, allowing for an area of autonomy. Although life of San Marino underwent reworking over time, the basic idea remained. Mount Titano had been entrusted to the saint, and this special condition explained the freedom of the whole community. On the Montefeltro side, instead, there is the Placito Feretrano, a very important document that reports a land dispute between the Bishop of Rimini and the Abbot of San Marino, presided over by the Bishop of Montefeltro. The judgment declares that the Abbot of San Marino retains ownership of some disputed lands. The date, 885, makes the text very interesting, but its authenticity is controversial. It could be a late 11th century forgery or a partially interpolated document. In any case, in the San Marino tradition, it will be considered a further proof of the ancient existence of a free monastery on Mount Titano. Life of San Marino and Placito Feretrano, therefore, tell the same story, that is to defend the autonomy of the mountain. Knowing this background allows us to understand how, between the 11th and 12th centuries, San Marino evolved from a defensive and religious settlement into a real small medieval state. In this period, the population starts concentrating around a fortified nucleus on the top of Mount Titano, a phenomenon we call encastellation. This was a widespread trend in central and northern Italy, where inhabitants of villages and countryside gather in walled centers to defend and organize themselves better. Powerful figures often promoted the encastellation: the bishop, the count, the abbot, everyone interested in controlling resources and the population more directly. Even on Mount Titano, the Bishop of Montefeltro extends his influence, while aristocratic families and monasteries of the neighboring areas hold property and right. This is how a castle was born, which little by little became the seat of a more compact community. And in the 12th century, the Pieve continues to be a religious point of reference, while political consciousness begins to mature. In 1243, in a notarial deed, the consules of the castle commune of San Marino appear for the first time. They are two elected figures who are responsible for representing the entire community. This is the proof that a municipality has formed. Interestingly, the office of the consules lasts without interruption until the present day, although we now call them captains regents. Moreover, in that period, the cities and villages of central and northern Italy were equipped with municipal institutions, with consuls, mayors, or captains of the people. San Marino chooses a formula of its own, with 2 representatives, always local, avoiding the figure of a foreign mayor. The first traces of statutes, that is to say, collections of rules governing internal life, date back to at least 1253. They cover everything, from military organization to rules of coexistence, from taxes to watchkeeping. During the 14th and 15th century, these statutes were renewed several times. We will talk more specifically about statutes in the 4th episode of this podcast. In short, the small community is given a legal and political framework, which guarantees a certain degree of stability. Growth in markets, such as that in Borgo Maggiore, and toll control strengthen autonomy. There are frictions with the Bishop of Montefeltro or with the Malatesta of Rimini, but San Marino is able to conserve its independence. The assembly of heads of families, that was called Arengo, and then the council, represent the collective will, while the 2 consules are the head of a simple but effective government. In this period, the perception also matures that the San Marino people are not servants of anyone. In 1296, the San Marino people refused to pay taxes to the mayor of Montefeltro. During the ensuing trial, some of the San Marino witnesses, when questioned, underlined that true freedom consists in not having a landlord. In fact, they replied in Latin with a phrase that would later become a real motto of the small state, nemini teneri, being unbound by constraints. It is a powerful statement. The community feels free because it does not belong to a lord, but only recognizes God above itself. In the 14th and 15th century, San Marino consolidated its institutional system even more. The walls are enlarged. The Guaita, the Cesta, and the Montale, that is to say the 3 towers, guarantee security, and the Domus Magna Communis, which serves as a government building, is built. San Marino does not evolve into a lordship, does not introduce a foreign mayor, but it maintains 2 domestic figures of equal dignity. It is true that the Bishop of Montefeltro and other lords still exert influence, but in the long run, San Marino will be able to protect itself from absorptions and reserve its room for maneuver. In 1462, for example, San Marino went to war alongside the Pope and the Montefeltro counts of Urbino against the Malatesta lords of Rimini. At the end of the conflict, in exchange for the aid given against the Malatesta, San Marino receives from the Pope new lands, Serravalle, Montegiardino, Fiorentino, and Faetano, reaching its current surface. It is a particularly important event because from that moment, San Marino will no longer take part in armed conflicts. In short, as we have seen, San Marino Middle Ages are indeed full of events and have a very important identity function for the state of San Marino. It is no coincidence that centuries later the medieval imagery will be revived vigorously. Thanks to the work by Gino Zani in the first half of the 1900s, the towers and walls were restored in 14th century style, contributing to present medieval appearance of San Marino. It is a neo-medieval operation that is part of a wider European phenomenon of aesthetic recovery of the Middle Ages with political and identity reasons, and with an eye to tourism potential. UNESCO has recognized the historic center of San Marino as a World Heritage Site that preserves both the actual history and the modern reinterpretation of the past. Freedom, therefore, is not a static concept. Over the centuries, it has been interpreted as emancipation from a lord, as the ability to elect its rulers, as the defense of autonomy against imperial or papal interference, as a medieval image to be displayed on the outside. The coexistence of all these levels explain the longevity of the San Marino state. The history of San Marino, perched on a seemingly isolated mountain, is actually well connected to the great events of Italian and European history. In medieval times, among uncertain documents, monks, stories of saints, and works of fortification, a community was formed that claimed a freedom that took different forms. personal emancipation, civic participation, and defense of sovereignty. It is also a set of stories which over time have consolidated the idea that this republic has its roots in a very distant past. From the first attestations of the Castellum Sancti Marini to the establishment of the municipality, from the contrast with the Bishop of Montefeltro to the territorial conquests, the medieval history of San Marino has been an exercise of diplomacy and an example of resistance. Although tiny, San Marino has been able to go through wars, revolutions, and political changes, maintaining a system based on an assembly and 2 top consules. It has never become a lordship. It has almost never been annexed by the church state, and on the contrary, it has gradually expanded. The legend of Marino and the constant reference to ancient origins have played a decisive role in affirming the right to self-government. Over the centuries, the Republic has been able to renew this narrative, drawing on medieval sources to legitimize its independence. The changes of the 20th century, with the restoration in medieval style, also reflect the desire to reaffirm a specific identity. UNESCO defines it a modern medievalization that has become an integral part of the San Marino charm. In the next few episodes, we will see how this freedom has been defended and adapted over time, facing the ambitions of neighboring powers, the challenges of wars, and the dynamics of an Italy in turmoil. We will discover how San Marino moved between faithfulness to its past and strategic openings to the new, always retaining its prerogative of being the oldest republic in the world. If you enjoyed this first episode of The Oldest Republic, stay with us. From here, we will continue the story, analyzing further documents, key episodes, and characters that have marked San Marino's history. Thank you for listening, and until the next episode, goodbye.